our focus a little bit, talk a little more national with my good friend John Talty from 24/7 Sports, national college football writer. Hope you had a Merry Christmas, my friend.
I did. I hope you had the same.
You know that I did. I keep it jolly down here in the Magnolia State. So after the first week of the playoff, a lot of whining and crying, notably from some people here in this state about everything that happened. I thought that, by and large, I agreed with the teams that were in. I know the games weren't necessarily the best games we've ever had, but that sometimes happens. Do you think they're going to blow this up pretty quickly? Do you think in 2 years we're going to see some major changes, or is it just a lot of bluster and, we're kind of locked into this 12 team the way that it's set up for the foreseeable future?
No, I do think we're going to get changes in the next couple of years. As you mentioned, 2026 is really the next big opportunity for there to be format changes, and I think that comes in two really potential different areas. One is an obvious one, and that's expanding the field, and that would be moving to 14 or 16. The other one, which I've written about at CBS Sports, and it's our good friend Ross Dellinger has been writing about it as well, is where you take away some of the power away from the selection committee, and that could be in the form of automatic bids, which in that sense would be maybe the SEC and Big Ten would get 3 or 4 each. ACC and Big 12 might get 1 or 2 each. And then the rest would be at large plus 1 for Group of 5, or just some other format of kind of moving some of that power away from the selection committee. I think that was. We know that was already happening even before what happened in terms of the field that was picked and how the first round played out. But I think the results that we saw in some of those blowouts, I do think gives some of those people, particularly the Big Ten and the SEC leaders, even more ammo to try to push for some major changes in the coming years.
If it was college football czar John Talty, what would he do?
I think I would actually go the opposite way, and I think, to me, I would probably be more 8 teams, all at-large bids. I think in some ways what we're at right now is, I think, so great for the sport. I'm working on a story about Arizona State right now, and a year ago Arizona State was terrible, and now they're in the playoff, and that's invigorating for that fan base, and they're excited, and it's an incredible story. And I think that's really good for college football, and I think particular what we saw over the last decade, it was so dominated by the South that, you were losing the West Coast, you were losing some of these big markets. But all that aside, when you look at any given year, it's hard to really talk yourself into more than 4 or 5 teams winning a national championship. Maybe some years like this one feels a little bit more wide open. 8 to me feels more likely of like, all right, there could be 8 real teams that could win a national championship. The more and more you go, it's hard to see just the way that football works out and the way rosters are built, really seeing 16 teams legitimately claiming a shot to win a national championship. So if it was up to me, I'd probably, reduce a little bit. But with the way the world works, if there's an opportunity to make more money, that's what they're going to do. And so that means more teams, not less. And so what John Talty wants is certainly not going to play out.
I like what John Talty wants, just for the record there. I think that's the correct format. We've got 8 teams now getting ready to play in the next round of playoff action. Let's talk about these games a little bit. Is Georgia capable of winning a national title without Carson Beck?
I think they still are. I think that, they have certainly a tough test here. I do think that they are on the much easier side of the bracket. So if they can, get to a title game, maybe a little less beat up than some of these other teams, you can talk yourself into it. There's a little bit of if your listeners have ever watched the movie Draft Day, there's a little bit of that Carson Beck situation where, the analogy of the movie is like the QB who's possibly up to be the number 1 draft pick, like nobody went to his birthday. And I'm not saying that's the same with Carson Beck, but I have heard rumblings. You hear some different things around that program, wondering, how liked he is. He's got some off-the-field things that he focuses on, whether he's maybe the greatest teammate of all time. I think Gunnar Stockton's a hardworking kid, certainly not as physically talented as Carson Beck, but you saw how they rallied around him in the second half of that game against Texas, that if you look at the most optimistic perspective, you could talk yourself into, that team rallying around Stockton, and you can beat Notre Dame, and then you get the winner of Penn State, Boise. I love Boise. I think they're a great story, but Georgia, I think, can beat them. Haven't been a huge fan of Penn State all year. I thought they've been overrated. Before you know it, you're in the national championship game, and then it's just, do you trust Kirby Smart to win it all? Well, he's won it twice. So there's definitely a path. There's definitely talk as to why they can and would win it all, but it's certainly a lot going to depend on what Gunnar Stockton is able to do against Notre Dame here first.
I just want to let you know I keep a piece of paper in my pocket at all times that says John Talty, no matter what. I just want to let you know that.
Exactly. There you go.
I felt like Ohio State kind of like turned off the router and turned it back on again this past weekend. That they were middling along. I thought the Michigan loss was weighing on them, and then they just shook it off and looked like the best team in the country. And now I would tell you probably the favorite to win it all at this point. When you look at this Ohio State team, how did they turn it around so quickly? Because I thought coming into that they were in a fog.
Yeah, so I was at that game in Columbus, and they looked incredible. And certainly in that moment, watching them beat up on a Tennessee team that, honestly, I thought was pretty solid this year. I mean, I expected that Tennessee team to struggle offensively early in that game. They kind of have all year. But that defense has been really good all year long and played against some pretty good teams. And Ohio State just made them look silly. And to me, I mean, it's a little overly simplistic, but it's like Ryan Day and offensive coordinator Chip Kelly realized, hey, we probably have the best wide receiver in the country in Jeremiah Smith. Maybe we should get him the ball more because they did not target him at all at the end of that game against Michigan. Didn't really make sense to anybody. And I felt like they got back into more of, what they're capable of doing, which is being explosive. Will Howard, I thought, looked terrific against that Tennessee defense, handled some of the pressure well. But the offensive line held up a lot better. I think that's a key of that story is that after Seth McLaughlin, their center, went down, they had some other injuries along the line. They just were disjointed, didn't seem to really know what they were doing, tried to run the ball a lot against Michigan to little success. I felt like against Tennessee, we saw more of what that team can look like when all pieces are really pulling in the same direction. And so, I think you could say that it's an early title game between Oregon and Ohio State. Those are the two teams that I feel best about right now. I probably have Texas at 3, Georgia 4. But it's tough for Oregon that they're having to play an Ohio State team that's so hot right now. But that's part of, I think, why we'll see some playoff format changes down the line because they've gotten a tough road here. But I'm excited for this game because I think both those teams are really, really good. And we, of course, saw, in October just how close those teams were. 1-point game, and Ohio State had a shot to win it at the end and kind of got outmaneuvered by Oregon there.
And just a couple minutes left with you here, John. But speaking of Oregon, I feel like, are they the most slept on number one team of all time? Nobody talks about Oregon, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of the classic East Coast bias, right? I think sometimes those West Coast teams just don't get as much attention. They didn't have Dylan Gabriel was really good, but he didn't really get as much Heisman hype as you would expect from a number one team. And again, I know he was in the mix there as a finalist, but I don't really think I heard much about Dylan Gabriel throughout the year, as good as he is. And yeah, I mean, they won the Big Ten championship. Didn't seem like they got really much of a bump from it. I mean, in this current era, it's going to be harder than ever, I think, to go undefeated, to run the table, and they have a shot to, and that's amazing. And to your point, I don't know that any of us are really talking about it as much as they should. And I don't know, again, if it's maybe just because we've seen Oregon blow some games in tough spots in the past, and that even though they haven't done it this year, maybe we just haven't fully bought into them yet. I'm not quite sure what it is, but top to bottom, they're really, really talented, and I think that, again, that they are probably one of 4 teams or so that are left that I truly believe can win it all.
I think you kind of already answered this, but we've only got about 60 seconds left. More likely upset, Boise State or Arizona State?
It's a tough one. I guess I'll go Arizona State. I think Boise's really good. I love Ashton Genty, but I still think that Penn State probably has a little bit too much for them. Even though, again, I think that Penn State's been a fraud all year. Arizona State, you could talk yourself into the kind of the Cam and Sam show. Giving Texas some problems. Texas looked really good against Clemson. They kind of fumbled it a little bit toward the end there. But the one thing with Texas, as good as their defense is that they struggle at times in the red zone that I think can allow a team to hang around. And that's what I think it'll be. Neither one really has a geographic advantage of the game being in Atlanta. So I think the favorites win both those games, to be honest with you, Brian. But if I had to pick one, in part maybe just because I'm doing a story on Arizona State, I'll go up to Sun Devils.
Where are you going to be for these games?
I think Atlanta, so that's kind of where I'm leaning toward. I talked to the legend Jake the Snake Plummer earlier today. He feels good about Arizona State's chances, so you heard it from him first.
There you go. If the Snake says it, I'll buy into it. John Talty, 24/7 Sports, man. Appreciate you as always. Merry Christmas. Thanks for joining me.